Let me ask you something. If you raised someone from birth, protected them, taught them everything they needed to survive, would they remember you 3 years later? Would they recognize your face, your voice, your presence? Now ask yourself the same question, but make those someones 4 white tigers weighing over 500 pounds each. Tigers with claws designed to shred, jaws powerful enough to crush bone, and instincts honed over thousands of years to hunt and dominate. Still think they'd remember? At Pine Ridge Wildlife Reserve in Montana, a German shepherd named Ranger was about to find out. It happened fast. One moment, staff were conducting their usual safety checks. The next, Ranger broke formation and sprinted toward the tiger enclosure like his life depended on it. Keepers yelled commands, radios buzzed with emergency calls. But nothing stopped him. "Ranger, no!" Headkeeper Jacob Cole chased after him, already knowing he'd never make it in time. The shepherd squeezed through a gap in the fence and charged straight into the habitat. 4 white tigers immediately turned their attention toward him, their muscles tensed, their eyes narrowed. They began moving in his direction with that predatory focus that meant business. Staff watching from the observation deck felt their stomachs drop. "Get the sedatives ready," someone said quietly. "We're about to lose him." But here's the thing about assumptions. Sometimes they're dead wrong. When those 4 tigers reached Ranger, they didn't attack. They didn't roar or swipe or show aggression. Instead, the largest male, a tiger named Chase, circled behind the shepherd and sat down. The others moved into formation around him, not threatening, guarding. "What are they doing?" a young keeper asked. Nobody could answer, because what was unfolding defied every rule of wildlife behavior they'd ever learned. Before we dive into how this extraordinary relationship began, make sure you're subscribed. This story gets even more unbelievable. Drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? Our community spans every continent, and I love seeing how far stories like this travel. Because what you're about to hear started 3 years earlier, with 4 dying tiger cubs and a grieving German shepherd who had just lost everything. 3 years earlier, on a frozen February morning, U.S. Fish and Wildlife agent Rebecca Torres received a call that would change everything. "We've got a situation near the Yellowstone border." The voice on her radio crackled. "Possible unauthorized activity. You need to see this." Rebecca had worked wildlife crimes for 12 years. She'd seen plenty of cases, elk, bears, even wolves. But nothing prepared her for what she found that morning along the banks of the Snake River. The white tiger lay sprawled across the snow, her body still warm. Dark marks lay beneath her, contrasting against the pristine white. Her massive paws were frozen mid-reach, as if she'd been trying to crawl toward something even in the end. "Unbelievable," Rebecca whispered. White tigers weren't native to Montana. This one had likely escaped from a private collector or been transported across state lines. Either way, someone had tracked her down and ended it without hesitation. But that wasn't the worst part. Rebecca's partner, Agent Damon Wright, called out from behind a cluster of frost-covered rocks. "Torres, get over here, now!" She moved quickly, boots crunching through ice. When she rounded the rocks, her breath caught. 4 tiny cubs huddled together in a shallow den, their white and black striped bodies barely visible against the snow. They weren't moving. For a horrible moment, Rebecca thought they were gone. Then one of them mewed, a sound so weak, so desperate and unknown, it barely carried 3 feet. "They're alive," Damon said, his voice tight. "Barely." Rebecca dropped to her knees beside them. The cubs were newborns, maybe 72 hours old at most. Their eyes were still closed. Signs of their recent arrival clung to their fur. They trembled violently in the below-freezing temperature. "How long have they been out here without her?" Rebecca asked. Damon checked the mother's body temperature. "At least 6 hours, maybe longer." 6 hours. In this cold, without their mother's warmth or milk. Rebecca carefully scooped up the smallest cub. It weighed maybe 3 pounds, its body cold to the touch despite the thick fur. She tucked it inside her jacket against her chest. "Call Pine Ridge Reserve," she ordered. "Tell them we're coming in hot with 4 critical cubs. They've got maybe 24 hours to stabilize them, or we're looking at 4 more losses." The drive to Pine Ridge Wildlife Reserve took 90 minutes. Every minute felt like an eternity. Rebecca kept checking the cub inside her jacket, terrified it would stop breathing. The other 3 were wrapped in emergency thermal blankets in a heated transport crate. But they weren't responding well. When they finally reached the reserve, Dr. Amara Hughes was waiting at the entrance with her emergency team. "Get them inside," she commanded, already moving toward the medical facility. "How long since they've eaten?" "We don't know," Rebecca said. "Mother's been gone at least 6 hours. Could be longer." Dr. Hughes's face went pale, but she didn't slow down. Her team worked fast. Warming stations, oxygen support, glucose injections. Within minutes, the cubs were on heated beds with IV fluids running. But here's where the real problem started. The cubs refused to eat. "Doctor?" Hughes tried bottle feeding. The cubs turned their heads away. She tried different formulas: goat milk, specialized tiger formula, even hand feeding with pipettes. Nothing worked. The cubs were shutting down, rejecting every attempt to save them. "They're giving up," Dr. Hughes said after the 8th failed feeding attempt. "Without their mother, they don't understand what we're trying to do. They think we're threats, not help." Her lead veterinary assistant, a woman named Claire Donovan, looked up from the smallest cub. "Doctor, this one's temperature is dropping again, even with the warmers." Dr. Hughes checked the monitors. All 4 cubs were declining, heart rate slowing, body temperatures falling. They were fading right in front of her team, and there was nothing conventional medicine could do about it. "They need a mother," Claire said quietly. "Not bottles, not humans. They need something alive that can show them it's safe to trust us." Dr. Hughes stared at the 4 trembling cubs, her mind racing through possibilities. She'd worked with orphaned animals for 15 years. She knew Claire was right. These cubs needed a surrogate, something with maternal instincts, something patient enough to handle newborns, something strong enough to survive their eventual growth. But what kind of animal could possibly fill that role? That's when someone mentioned the retired police dog living in the sanctuary's recovery wing. A German shepherd who'd been grieving his handler's loss for 6 months. A dog with nothing left to protect. A dog named Ranger. Dr. Hughes made a decision that would either save 4 lives or end in disaster. She had 48 hours before these cubs were lost. 48 hours to try something that had never been done before. "Bring me the shepherd," she said. Ranger heard footsteps approaching his kennel and didn't bother lifting his head. The German shepherd lay in the corner of his recovery enclosure, muzzle resting on his paws, amber eyes staring at nothing. His sable coat, a rich mix of black and tan that had once gleamed under the Idaho sun, looked dull now. He'd stopped grooming himself weeks ago. "Hey, buddy," Claire Donovan said softly, unlatching the gate. "Dr. Hughes needs to see you." Ranger's ears flicked toward the sound of her voice, but he didn't move. He'd been at Pine Ridge Reserve for 6 months now. 6 months since the flood. 6 months since everything changed. Claire knelt beside him, running her hand along his shoulder. She could feel the muscle beneath his fur, still strong, still capable. This dog had been built for work, trained for years in tracking, search and rescue, and critical response. His body remembered every command, every drill, every mission, but his spirit was somewhere else entirely. "Come on," Claire urged gently. "I know you're tired, but someone needs you." At that, Ranger's head lifted slightly. His amber eyes met hers, and for just a moment Claire saw a flicker of the dog he used to be. 6 months ago, Ranger had been one of the best K-9 officers in the Pacific Northwest. His handler, Officer Marcus Hale, called him the nose that never quits. They'd worked together for 7 years, tracking missing hikers, finding lost children, locating evidence that closed cases. They were a team, a unit, brothers in every way that mattered. Then came the Spring River flood in Idaho. A family had been trapped in their vehicle when flash flooding swept through a canyon. Marcus and Ranger were part of the emergency response team. The water was rising fast, chest high and climbing. Other rescuers held back, waiting for equipment. But Marcus saw the 2 kids in the back seat, saw the terror on their faces, and made the call. He went in. Ranger went with him. They reached the vehicle. Marcus got the car door open and handed the first child to another rescuer. Then the second kid. The mother was next, clinging to Marcus's vest as he pulled her toward safety. That's when the upstream dam failed. A wall of water 20 feet high came roaring through the canyon. Ranger saw it first. He barked. That sharp, urgent warning bark that meant immediate danger. Marcus turned, saw the wave, and made his final decision. He threw Ranger toward the riverbank. The dog hit shallow water and scrambled onto rocks. He spun around just in time to see the flood overtake Marcus. The water rose instantly. Vehicle, officer, everything was swept away. They found Marcus 2 days later, 8 miles downstream. Ranger had stayed at the search site for 48 hours straight. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't rest. Just kept searching, kept trying to pick up Marcus's scent, kept refusing to believe his handler was gone. When they finally pulled Ranger away, he had lost 12 pounds and could barely stand. The police department retired him immediately. He was only 7 years old, prime working age for a German shepherd, but they knew he was done. Dogs who lose their handlers either find new purpose fast, or they lose the will to keep going. Pine Ridge Reserve had agreed to take him as a transition animal, somewhere quiet where he could recover. Maybe eventually be adopted by a family. But 6 months later, Ranger still woke up every morning looking for Marcus, still walked the perimeter of his enclosure like he was on patrol, still responded to commands that no one gave anymore. He was a soldier without a war, a protector with nothing to protect. "Ranger," Claire said firmly, standing up. "On your feet." Something in her tone cut through the fog. Ranger rose slowly, shaking out his coat. His posture straightened, shoulders back, head up, the disciplined stance that came from years of training. Claire clipped a lead to his collar and walked him toward the medical facility. Ranger followed, his gait steady despite the months of inactivity. His nose lifted as they approached the building, catching unfamiliar scents. Something wild, something young, something desperate. Doctor. Hughes met them at the entrance to the nursery unit. "This is a long shot," she said, looking directly at Ranger. "But you're all we've got." She opened the door. The sound hit Ranger immediately. Weak mewing, the kind newborns make when they're fading. His ears went forward, his body tensed. Every instinct that had made him an exceptional search and rescue dog suddenly activated. Something small needed help. Dr. Hughes led him into the room. 4 tiny white tiger cubs lay on heated beds, their striped bodies trembling. Their mewing grew louder when Ranger entered, as if they sensed a presence that wasn't human. "They're rejecting us," Dr. Hughes explained. "But maybe they won't reject you." Ranger approached slowly, nose working overtime. He'd never seen tigers before, but his brain processed the information quickly. Young, vulnerable, no threat. His tail, which hadn't moved in weeks, gave a single cautious wag. Dr. Hughes held her breath. This was the moment. Either Ranger would reject them, see them as threats or simply not care, or something else would happen. Something that couldn't be taught or trained or forced. Ranger lowered his head and sniffed the nearest cub. The tiny tiger, barely bigger than Ranger's paw, lifted its face toward the shepherd's muzzle. Then Ranger did something that made Dr. Hughes's eyes fill with tears. He lay down beside the cubs and pulled them close with his nose, the way a mother dog moves her puppies. One by one, the 4 tiger cubs crawled toward his warmth. Within seconds, they were pressed against his chest, their mewing starting to quiet. For the first time in 6 months, Ranger's eyes looked clear, focused, alive. He'd found something to protect again. Dr. Hughes watched through the observation window, barely breathing. Ranger had been lying with the cubs for 20 minutes now. His body curled protectively around them, creating a warm barrier against the world. The 4 tiny tigers had stopped their desperate mewing and were now pressed against his chest and stomach, their small bodies rising and falling with his breath. "Should we try feeding them again?" Claire whispered. "Give it a few more minutes," Dr. Hughes replied. "Let them feel safe first." But Ranger had other plans. The German shepherd lifted his head and looked directly at the observation window. His amber eyes locked onto Dr. Hughes with an intensity she recognized. The same focused stare working dogs give when they're trying to communicate something important. He wanted the bottles. "Doctor." Hughes moved slowly into the nursery, carrying the specialized formula they'd prepared earlier. Ranger watched her approach, but didn't tense. Instead, he gently nosed the smallest cub, a female, toward Dr. Hughes's hand. "You're telling me she goes first?" Dr. Hughes asked softly. Ranger's tail thumped once against the floor. "Yes." Dr. Hughes knelt beside them and offered the bottle to the tiny cub. For the first time in 12 hours, the cub didn't turn away. She latched onto the nipple and began drinking, weak at first, then stronger. Her small paws kneaded against Ranger's fur as she fed, the same motion tiger cubs use with their mothers. "Oh my God," Claire breathed from the doorway. "It's working." One by one, Ranger nudged each cub toward the bottles. The second female, slightly larger than her sister, drank eagerly once she saw the first cub feeding. The 2 males took longer to convince, but Ranger was patient. He'd lick their faces between attempts, encouraging them, showing them it was safe. By midnight, all 4 cubs had eaten their first full meal. Dr. Hughes wanted to move Ranger back to his enclosure and let the cubs rest in the warming stations. But the moment she reached for his collar, all 4 cubs started mewing again, louder this time, panicked. Their tiny claws dug into Ranger's fur, refusing to let go. "Okay," Dr. Hughes said, backing off. "You stay, but I'm monitoring vitals every hour." She set up a cot in the corner of the nursery and settled in for the night. Through the dim glow of the heat lamps, she watched Ranger work. He wasn't just lying there. He was parenting. When one cub crawled too far away, Ranger would gently pull it back with his paw. When another got tangled in the blankets, he'd use his nose to free it. Around 3 in the morning, the smallest female started crying. That distressed sound that meant discomfort. Ranger immediately began licking her stomach in small, circular motions. Within minutes, she passed gas and settled back down. "He's helping her digest," Dr. Hughes murmured, making notes. "He knows what to do." But the most remarkable moment came just before dawn. The largest male cub, the one who'd been most resistant to feeding, suddenly let out a sound that made everyone in the facility freeze. A roar. Tiny, squeaky, barely louder than a kitten's mew, but unmistakably a roar. Ranger's ears shot forward. He looked down at the cub, then back up at Dr. Hughes. His tail wagged, actually wagged, for the first time since Marcus was lost. The cub roared again, this time with more confidence. Then the other 3 joined in. 4 baby tiger roars echoed through the nursery, while a German shepherd sat among them, looking prouder than any father who'd ever lived. "We need to name them," Claire said, wiping tears from her eyes. "They're going to make it. They need names." Dr. Hughes watched the smallest female, the first one who'd accepted the bottle, as she explored Ranger's face with her tiny paws. Curious, brave despite her size. "Kara," Dr. Hughes said. "The small one. She's Kara." The second female had barely made a sound all night, quiet, observant, watching everything before making a move. "June," Claire offered. "She's gentle." The largest male, the one who'd roared first, kept trying to climb over his siblings, dominant, always pushing forward. "Chase," one of the night staff suggested, "because he's always chasing attention." That left the 4th cub, the male who'd been slowest to feed, most hesitant to trust. But once he'd committed, he'd drunk more than any of them. Timid on the surface, powerful underneath. "Frost," Dr. Hughes said finally. "Strong but careful." Kara, June, Chase, and Frost. 4 white tiger cubs who should not have survived the snow. 4 orphans who'd rejected every human attempt to save them. 4 predators who'd found safety in the most unlikely place. Curled up against a grieving German shepherd who'd needed them just as much as they'd needed him. By the end of the first week, the cubs had gained 2 pounds each. Their eyes opened on day 9, bright blue and curious. They started crawling on day 12, always toward Ranger, always seeking his warmth. And Ranger changed too. His coat started to shine again. He ate his meals without prompting. He stood taller, moved with purpose. Every morning he'd wait at the nursery door until staff let him in. Every night he'd curl around the cubs and refuse to leave. The fog that had consumed him since the accident was finally lifting, because he'd found something worth living for again. But Dr. Hughes knew something the others didn't, something that kept her awake at night, even as she celebrated the cubs' survival. Tiger cubs grow fast, very fast. In 6 months, these tiny babies would weigh 60 pounds each. In a year, over 100. In 2 years, they'd be full-grown apex predators with teeth designed to crush bone and claws designed to end a threat instantly. And when that day came, Would they still see Ranger as their protector? Or would instinct take over and turn this miracle into a tragedy? 6 months later, the Pine Ridge Reserve Nursery looked like a training ground. Ranger stood at one end of the enclosure, body tense, eyes locked forward. 50 feet away, 4 white tiger cubs, now weighing 60 pounds each, crouched in the tall grass. Their blue eyes tracked his every movement. "Watch this," Claire whispered to the film crew documenting the family. "He's teaching them to track." Ranger suddenly bolted to the left, weaving between obstacles Dr. Hughes had set up specifically for these exercises. The cubs exploded into motion, chasing him with surprising coordination. They didn't just run, they flanked him. 2 from each side, working together like a tactical unit, like a police K-9 unit. "He's teaching them his search and rescue patterns," Dr. Hughes explained to the camera. "They're learning tracking behaviors they'd normally get from their mother, but filtered through his police training." The video went viral within 24 hours. 3 million views in the first day, 10 million by the end of the week. News outlets from around the world descended on Pine Ridge Reserve. The German shepherd-raising tigers became the feel-good story everyone needed. University researchers arrived next, wanting to study the bond. Dr. Elena Rodriguez from UC Berkeley spent 2 weeks observing the family. "This is unprecedented," she told Dr. Hughes. "Ranger isn't just keeping them alive, he's actually parenting them, teaching them boundaries, social cues, even cooperative hunting strategies." It was true. Ranger had developed an entire curriculum for the cubs. When Kara got too rough during play, Ranger would pin her gently until she calmed down. When June tried to stalk the smaller animals in nearby enclosures, he'd block her path and redirect her attention. When Chase and Frost fought over food, Ranger would step between them and make them wait until they'd settled. The cubs respected him completely. At least they did in the beginning. The first crack appeared during a routine feeding in late August. Chase had grown faster than his siblings, already pushing 75 pounds of pure muscle. When staff brought in their afternoon meal, Chase rushed forward and grabbed the largest portion. Frost tried to approach, and Chase swatted at him. Not playing, actually aggressive. Ranger immediately moved to correct him, the way he had done 100 times before. But this time, Chase didn't back down. The young tiger turned toward Ranger and growled, a real growl. Deep, territorial, warning. Ranger froze. His ears went back slightly. For 3 seconds, neither of them moved. Then Chase lowered his head and stepped aside. But the message was clear. He'd challenged the shepherd. And for a moment, just a moment, he'd considered not backing down. Dr. Hughes reviewed the security footage a dozen times that night. "It's starting," she told Jacob Cole, the head keeper. "Dominance behaviors. Chase is testing boundaries." "They're just maturing," Jacob argued. "Adolescent animals always push back." "Not like this. Did you see how long Chase held that stare? 3 seconds. That's not play, that's a predator evaluating a threat." 2 weeks later, things got worse. A handler named Devin Torres was cleaning the enclosure while Ranger supervised the cubs in the outdoor area. June had been watching him work, sitting perfectly still near the fence line. Devin thought nothing of it. June was the quietest cub, the least aggressive. Until she wasn't. June suddenly launched herself at Devin from 12 feet away. Her body hit his chest like a linebacker, knocking him flat on his back. Her jaws clamped down on his forearm, not breaking skin but applying pressure. Real pressure. "June, off!" Ranger barked, charging toward them. June released immediately and backed away, but the damage was done. Devon's arm was bruised, his shirt torn. More importantly, everyone had seen the look in June's eyes just before she'd released. She'd been hunting. That was a stalk pattern, Doctor. Rodriguez confirmed after reviewing the footage. She tracked his movements, calculated the distance, and executed a capture. That wasn't play aggression. That was predatory instinct. The Sanctuary Board called an emergency meeting. Dr. Hughes showed them the footage, Chase's growl, June's attack, and a dozen other incidents she'd been documenting. Kara stalking smaller animals with intense focus. Frost using his weight to pin staff members against walls, playfully. The cubs wrestling with each other with increasing ferocity, leaving marks. They're becoming what they were always meant to be, Dr. Hughes said quietly. Apex predators. What about Ranger? Jacob asked. They still listen to him. For now, Dr. Hughes replied. But he's getting older, and they're getting stronger. In 6 months, any one of them will outweigh him by 100 pounds. In a year, they'll be 3 times his size. Board member Patricia Chen leaned forward. Are you saying we need to separate them? The room went silent. Dr. Hughes looked at the monitor showing the live feed from the enclosure. Ranger lay in the grass, all 4 cubs pressed against him, sleeping peacefully. The image that had made them famous. The bond that had saved 4 lives. I'm saying we need to decide if we're willing to risk Ranger's life to keep this family together, she said, because that's what we're talking about now. One bad day. One moment where instinct overrides training. And Ranger doesn't make it. Claire stood up abruptly. There has to be another way. They love him. They do, Dr. Hughes agreed. But love doesn't override biology. And biology is very clear about what happens when predators reach maturity. That night, Ranger seemed to sense the tension. He stayed closer to the cubs than usual, correcting their behavior more frequently, asserting his authority in small ways, reminding them who was in charge. But during the late feeding, something happened that no one caught on camera. Chase approached the food first, as always. Ranger moved to make him wait for the others. And this time, Chase didn't just growl. He bared his teeth. Ranger held his ground, but for the first time in 8 months, he had to work for Chase's submission. It took 15 seconds, an eternity in animal behavior, before Chase finally backed down. After the cubs ate and settled in for the night, Claire found Ranger lying alone near the fence line. He wasn't sleeping. He was watching them, vigilant, alert, like a police officer who'd just realized his partner might become the threat. Dr. Hughes made her recommendation to the board the next morning. They had 30 days to prepare. 30 days before the cubs would be moved to a separate, reinforced habitat designed for adult predators. 30 days before Ranger would lose his family again. But here's what nobody knew yet. The cubs were about to do something that would force the decision much sooner than anyone planned. Something that would prove Dr. Hughes right about the danger, and wrong about whether the bond could survive it. If you're rooting for Ranger, make sure you're subscribed right now, because the separation coming up next is the hardest part of this journey. The decision came down on a cold October morning. Dr. Hughes stood in front of the Sanctuary Board, her hands shaking as she held the incident report. 3 days earlier, Chase had knocked down a veterinary assistant during a routine checkup. The young tiger hadn't bitten her, hadn't drawn blood, but he'd put his paw on her chest and held her down for 8 seconds before Ranger intervened. 8 seconds of a 120-pound predator pinning a human to the ground. "We can't wait any longer," Board Chair Patricia Chen said. "The new habitat is ready. We moved them this week." Dr. Hughes nodded, unable to speak. She'd known this day was coming. She'd recommended it herself. But knowing didn't make it hurt any less. The relocation was scheduled for Thursday at dawn, when the cubs were calmest. Staff spent 3 days preparing, reinforcing transport crates, sedating protocols, contingency plans if anything went wrong. Nobody talked about Ranger. Wednesday night, Dr. Hughes found Claire sitting outside the enclosure, watching Ranger sleep with the cubs one last time. All 4 tigers were pressed against him, their massive bodies dwarfing the German shepherd who'd raised them. "He knows," Claire said quietly. "Look at him." Ranger wasn't sleeping. His eyes were open, staring into the darkness. His breathing was measured, controlled, the way soldiers breathe before going into combat. "He knows something's wrong," Claire continued. "Dogs always know." Thursday morning arrived too fast. Staff moved into position at 6 a.m. The plan was simple: lure the cubs into the transport area with food while Ranger was secured in a separate section. Quick, efficient, minimal stress. But Ranger didn't cooperate. The moment staff tried to lead him away from the cubs, he planted his feet and refused to move. Jacob Cole had to physically carry the 70-pound shepherd toward the holding area, while Ranger twisted and whined, trying to break free. "I'm sorry, buddy," Jacob whispered. "I'm so sorry." Behind them, the cubs had noticed. Kara started pacing. June pressed against the fence, watching Ranger disappear. Chase and Frost began vocalizing, low rumbling sounds that made everyone's skin crawl. The food lure worked on 3 of them. Kara, June, and Frost entered the transport crates within minutes, drawn by the scent of fresh meat. But Chase refused. He stood at the fence line, staring toward where Ranger had been taken, and roared. Not a cub roar. A full adult roar that shook the ground. "Prepare the dart," Dr. Hughes ordered. It took 2 darts to bring Chase down. Even sedated, he fought the crate, claws scraping against metal, that rumbling growl continuing until the sedation finally took hold. The transport trucks rolled out at 7:30 a.m. The new habitat was only half a mile away, but it might as well have been another country. Built for adult predators, the enclosure featured 20-foot concrete walls, reinforced fencing, and a moat system designed to contain animals 3 times the cub's current size. It was a fortress, and it was a prison. The cubs woke up in their new home around noon. The roaring started immediately, all 4 of them calling for Ranger in voices that carried across the entire reserve. Staff in the main building could hear them. Visitors a quarter-mile away stopped in their tracks. It was the sound of abandonment, of confusion, of betrayal. In the holding area, Ranger heard them too. He launched himself at the fence so hard that he bounced back and hit the ground. He got up and tried again, and again. His paws were raw from clawing at the chain link. His voice went hoarse from barking. "We have to let him go to them," Claire begged Dr. Hughes. "Please, this is unbearable." "If we let him in that enclosure now, he'll never leave," Dr. Hughes replied, her own voice breaking. "And eventually they'll hurt him, or worse." "So we just let him suffer?" "We let him heal." But Ranger didn't heal. For 3 days straight, he barely ate. He paced his enclosure constantly, wearing a path along the fence line closest to where the cubs were housed. Every time they roared, and they roared constantly. His entire body would tense, ears forward, ready to respond. On the fourth day, staff tried to relocate Ranger to a different section of the reserve, somewhere he couldn't hear the cubs. He escaped twice. The second time, they found him at the perimeter fence of the tiger habitat, digging at the base of the concrete wall with his front paws until his nails were worn down. "He's going to hurt himself," Jacob said. "We need to do something." Dr. Hughes made the hardest call of her career. Mild sedatives, just enough to take the edge off, and keep him in the climate-controlled building at night. No outside access. It worked in a way. Ranger stopped trying to escape. But he also stopped being Ranger. He moved through his days like a ghost, ate when told, walked when leashed. But his eyes were empty again. That same hollow look he'd had when he first arrived, after Marcus was lost. Meanwhile, the cubs adjusted to their new reality. The roaring decreased after the first week. By week 2, they'd stopped calling for Ranger altogether. They established new routines, feeding times, play patterns, territorial behaviors. June became the leader in Ranger's absence. Chase deferred to her, which surprised everyone. Kara and Frost formed their own bond, spending most of their time together. They were becoming a tiger family, without the dog who'd raised them. "It's better this way," Patricia Chen said during a board update. "Clean break. They're adapting." But Dr. Hughes wasn't convinced. She watched the security footage every night. The cubs would be playing, wrestling, acting like normal tigers. Then suddenly, one of them, usually Kara or June, would stop and stare toward the direction of the main facility, toward where Ranger was housed. They'd hold that position for 10, sometimes 20 seconds, just staring, remembering. 3 months passed. The cubs grew massive. Kara hit 180 pounds. June reached 200. Chase and Frost topped 220 each. They looked like adults now. Powerful. Dangerous. Magnificent. Ranger turned 8 years old in January. Staff threw him a small party, but he spent most of it lying in the corner, staring at the wall. Every morning, staff found him in the same spot, pressed against the window that faced east, toward the tiger habitat. He couldn't see them from there, couldn't hear them. But he knew which direction they were. And he waited. One night, Claire stayed late finishing paperwork. Around midnight, she heard something that made her blood run cold. Tiger roars. Distant, but unmistakable. She pulled up the security feed from the tiger habitat. All 4 cubs were at the fence line, staring toward the main facility, roaring in unison, the way they used to call for Ranger when they were babies. Claire switched to the feed from Ranger's building. The German Shepherd was standing at the window, ears forward, body rigid. And from deep in his chest came a sound Claire had never heard him make before. Long, mournful, desperate. The kind of sound that says, "I'm still here. I haven't forgotten. Please don't forget me." The cubs answered with another round of roars. This went on for 20 minutes before silence finally returned. But the message was clear. The bond wasn't broken. It was just buried, waiting for something, anything, to bring it back to the surface. 6 months later, that something would arrive in the form of a wildfire that would force everyone to answer one terrible question. When survival is on the line, do animals remember love, or only instinct? 3 years changed everything. Dr. Hughes stood at the observation deck of the tiger habitat, watching 4 massive white tigers move through their morning routine. It was hard to believe these were the same helpless cubs she'd bottle-fed in the nursery. Frost had grown into the largest, 520 pounds of solid muscle. His movements were deliberate, powerful, every step radiating the confidence of an apex predator in his prime. Chase wasn't far behind at 485 pounds, his dominant personality now backed by the physical strength to enforce it. The females were smaller, but no less impressive. June had reached 380 pounds, her quiet observation skills making her the group's strategist, and Kara, still the smallest at 340 pounds, moved with a speed and agility that made her the most dangerous hunter of them all. "They're magnificent," said Dr. Rachel Kim, the new lead researcher on the rewilding program. She'd joined Pine Ridge 2 years ago and never knew the tigers as cubs. Perfect candidates for eventual release. Dr. Hughes didn't respond. She was watching Kara, who'd stopped mid-stride and was staring toward the eastern fence line. The same direction she'd stared 1,000 times before. Toward where Ranger used to be. "Does she do that often?" Dr. Kim asked, following her gaze. "More than you'd think," Dr. Hughes replied quietly. The rewilding program had transformed the tigers into functional predators. They'd been taught to hunt naturally, starting small, working their way up the food chain. They'd learned territorial behaviors, survival skills, everything they'd need if they were ever released into a protected reserve where white tiger genetics were desperately needed. On paper, they were wild animals now, dangerous, unpredictable, exactly what nature intended. But Dr. Hughes saw things the new staff didn't. The way June would pause during feeding and tilt her head, like she was listening for something that wasn't there. The way Chase would sometimes play stalk the way Ranger had taught him, using flanking patterns no wild tiger would naturally know. The way Frost would lie in the exact spot where Ranger used to sleep with them, curled in the same protective position. They remembered. Half a mile away, in the sanctuary's retirement wing, Ranger was aging in ways that broke everyone's heart. At 10 years old, he moved slower now. Arthritis had settled into his hips and back legs, making the movements that used to come effortlessly now require visible effort. His muzzle had gone almost completely gray. His amber eyes, once sharp and focused, had developed the cloudy look that comes with time. But every single morning, Ranger made the same journey. Jacob Cole would open the door to Ranger's room at dawn, and the German shepherd would limp his way to the eastern window, the one that faced the tiger habitat. He couldn't see them from there. Too much distance, too many trees, but he knew the direction, and he'd sit there for hours, watching, waiting, remembering. "He's been doing this for 3 years, Jacob told a visiting journalist who was writing a follow-up piece on the famous tiger dog. "Every single day, rain, snow, heat, doesn't matter. He goes to that window." "Does he ever try to go to them anymore?" the journalist asked. Jacob shook his head. "He stopped trying to escape about a year after the separation. It's like he accepted it, but he never forgot." The journalist's article ran with the headline, "The Dog Who Still Waits." It went viral again, racking up millions of views. People commented with crying emojis, sharing their own stories of pets who'd grieved, animals who'd remembered, but what the public didn't see were the security tapes. Late at night, when the reserve was quiet, something remarkable happened with eerie regularity. The tigers would move to the northern section of their enclosure, the side closest to the main facility. They'd line up along the fence and stare into the darkness, not pacing, not agitated, just staring, like they were keeping watch. Dr. Hughes had reviewed months of footage. It happened at least twice a week, usually between midnight and 3 a.m., all 4 tigers standing silent vigil facing the direction where Ranger slept. "It's probably coincidence," Dr. Kim suggested when Dr. Hughes showed her the pattern. "Nocturnal behavior. They're just alert during those hours." "Then why do they only do it on that side of the enclosure?" Dr. Hughes challenged. "They have 40 acres, but twice a week they all gather at the fence closest to him." Dr. Kim had no answer. Claire Donovan, now the sanctuary's assistant director, had her own theory. "They're calling to him," she said, "not with sound, but with presence. It's what pack animals do. They maintain connection even when separated." "Tigers aren't pack animals, Doctor," Kim pointed out. "These ones were," Claire replied. "For the first year of their lives, they were." One night in late July, something different happened. The motion sensors in Ranger's building triggered an alert at 2:47 a.m. Security pulled up the feed and found Ranger standing at his window, not sitting, standing, with his nose pressed against the glass. They switched to the tiger habitat camera. All 4 tigers were at the fence. Not just standing, pacing now. June was making a low rumbling sound, not quite a roar, but close. Chase had his head raised, scenting the air. Kara kept touching her nose to the fence, like she was trying to smell something beyond it. And Frost was staring directly toward the main facility with an intensity that made the security guard's skin crawl. "It's like they know," the guard whispered into his radio. "Like they can sense him." The moment lasted 7 minutes. Then, as if by silent agreement, all 4 tigers turned and walked back into their habitat. On the other feed, Ranger slowly lay back down, but his eyes remained fixed on the window until dawn. Dr. Hughes added the footage to her growing collection. She had hundreds of hours now. 3 years of evidence that something beyond ordinary animal behavior was happening here. But the board didn't care about unexplained connections. They cared about public safety, insurance liability, and the rewilding program's success. "The tigers are ready for the next phase," Patricia Chen announced at the August board meeting. "We've been contacted by the Ranthambore Tiger Reserve in India. They want all 4 for their breeding program." "You're talking about shipping them overseas, Doctor?" Hughes asked, stunned. "They're genetically valuable," Patricia explained. "This is what we've been preparing them for, a chance to contribute to their species' survival." Jacob spoke up from the back of the room. "What about Ranger?" Patricia's expression softened. "Ranger is 10 years old with advancing arthritis. He's lived a good life. He'll stay here in retirement care until he's gone, never seeing them again," Jacob finished. The room went quiet. "I know this is emotional," Patricia said carefully, "but we can't make decisions based on a bond that existed 3 years ago. Those tigers are wild animals now. Ranger is an elderly dog. The connection they had is in the past." Dr. Hughes looked at the tablet in her lap, at the footage from 3 nights ago. 4 tigers and 1 dog, separated by half a mile and 3 years, somehow still finding each other in the darkness. "You're wrong," she said quietly. "That connection isn't in the past. It's just waiting for the right moment to prove it still exists." She had no idea how soon that moment would come, or how critical it would be, Do you believe animals can maintain bonds across years of separation? Let me hear your thoughts in the comment below. Also, hit subscribe, because the reunion that's coming will stop your heart. August 15th started like any other late summer day in Montana. Hot, dry, and tense. Fire warnings had been posted for 3 weeks. The surrounding forest was a tinderbox waiting for a spark. Staff at Pine Ridge Reserve had run evacuation drills twice that month, checking gates, updating protocols, ensuring every animal could be moved quickly if needed. But no drill prepares you for the real thing. The lightning strike hit at 2:17 p.m. on the ridge 2 miles west of the reserve. Within minutes, smoke billowed above the tree line. Within 30 minutes, the wind shifted east, directly toward Pine Ridge. "All hands, code red evacuation." Marcus Cole's voice boomed through the radio system. "This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill." Chaos erupted across the sanctuary. Staff scattered to their assigned stations. Transport trucks roared to life. Smaller animals, foxes, injured birds, rehabilitation cases, were loaded into crates first. The bears went next, then the wolves, then the elk. Dr. Hughes coordinated from the main facility, checking off species on her evacuation list as trucks rolled out toward the emergency shelter 10 miles south. "Tigers," she called into her radio. "On it," responded Keeper Andre Williams from the Big Cat facility. "Opening the hydraulic gates now." The tiger habitat had been designed with emergency evacuation in mind. 3 massive hydraulic gates could be opened remotely, creating a corridor that led directly to reinforced transport trailers. The system had been tested monthly. It had never failed. Until today. Andre hit the gate controls. Nothing happened. He tried again. The panel lights flickered, but the gates didn't move. "We've got a problem," Andre said into his radio, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Gates aren't responding." "Override it manually," Marcus ordered, already running toward the habitat. But when Andre reached the manual override panel, he found melted wiring. The extreme heat from the approaching fire had traveled through the metal fencing, warping the electrical system. The gates were dead. "Marcus, we're locked out," Andre's voice cracked. "The tigers are trapped." Dr. Hughes felt her stomach drop. She pulled up the reserve map on her tablet. The fire was spreading fast, much faster than projections predicted. At current speed, it would reach the tiger habitat in less than 40 minutes. "Get the cutting equipment," she ordered. "We cut through the fence if we have to." But the universe wasn't done throwing obstacles. A massive pine tree on the western edge of the property, weakened by drought and flames, suddenly gave way. It crashed across the main access road to the tiger habitat, bringing down power lines and creating a wall of sparking electricity and burning wood. The only route to the tigers was now completely blocked. "We can't get through!" Marcus shouted over the roar of the approaching fire. "The whole access road is gone." Dr. Hughes stared at the security monitor showing the tiger habitat. All 4 tigers were on their feet, pacing frantically. Smoke was already rolling into their enclosure. They could smell the fire, hear it, but they couldn't escape. Kara threw herself against the fence, roaring. June and Chase paced the perimeter, searching for an exit that didn't exist. Frost stood in the center, head raised, testing the air with growing panic. "We have to do something!" Claire screamed, tears streaming down her face. "We can't just leave them!" "The fire department is sending a helicopter," Patricia Chen said, phone pressed to her ear. But it's 20 minutes out. They'll try to sedate from the air and airlift them. Dr. Hughes did the math in her head. The fire would reach the habitat in 35 minutes, maybe 40. The helicopter might make it. Might. It was their only chance. Staff evacuated to the emergency shelter, watching helplessly as smoke consumed the western horizon. Dr. Hughes kept her eyes locked on the tablet showing the security feed from the tiger habitat. The smoke was getting thicker. The tigers were coughing now. Their movements becoming more frantic. Chase rammed the gate so hard the entire structure shook. But the hydraulics were dead. The metal didn't budge. "Where's the helicopter?" Marcus demanded. 15 minutes, Patricia replied. On the screen, Kara suddenly stopped pacing. Her head turned sharply toward the eastern fence line, the section closest to the main facility. "What's she looking at?" Claire whispered. Dr. Hughes zoomed in on the feed. For a moment, she saw nothing. Just smoke and trees and the growing orange glow of approaching flames. Then a shape emerged through the haze. 4 legs, tan and black coat, moving fast despite a noticeable limp. "Oh my God," Dr. Hughes breathed. It was Ranger. The German Shepherd was running, actually running, toward the tiger habitat. His arthritic gait was gone, replaced by something primal, pure determination. "How did he get out?" Marcus grabbed his radio. "Security, do we have a breach in the retirement wing?" "Affirmative." The response crackled back. "Door malfunction during evacuation, several animals loose on property. We're trying to—" Marcus didn't hear the rest. He was staring at the screen in disbelief. Ranger had reached the outer fence of the tiger habitat. Without hesitation, he squeezed through a gap in the chain link, a section that had been damaged during the tree fall, but was too small for humans to access. He was inside the perimeter. "He's going to them," Claire said, her voice barely audible. "After 3 years, he's going to them." On screen, all 4 tigers had stopped moving. They stood frozen, watching the German Shepherd approach through the smoke. The fire was 8 minutes away now, maybe less. Staff watched in horrified silence as Ranger limped across the open ground toward the inner gate that separated him from 4 500-pound predators. Predators he hadn't seen in 3 years. Predators who'd been trained to hunt and survive. "He won't survive this," Andre whispered. Ranger reached the inner fence. The tigers moved closer, slowly, deliberately. Their blue eyes locked onto the dog with an intensity that made everyone watching hold their breath. This was the moment that would answer the question that had haunted Dr. Hughes for 3 years. Would they remember him, or would instinct take over? The smoke thickened, making it harder to see the screen clearly. The fire's roar was audible now, even from 10 miles away. The helicopter was still 12 minutes out, and in that tiger habitat, surrounded by smoke and fire and certain doom, a 10-year-old German Shepherd stood face to face with the cubs he'd raised. Cubs who were now apex predators capable of ending him with a single swipe. Claire grabbed Dr. Hughes's arm. "What's he doing? Why would he run toward them?" Dr. Hughes knew the answer. She'd known it the moment she saw Ranger on that screen. He wasn't running toward them. He was running to save them, even if it cost him everything. The screen flickered. The smoke grew darker. And everyone watching waited to see who would get to Ranger and those tigers first. The flames, or something far more unexpected. Through the smoke-filled screen, staff watched Ranger squeeze through the final fence barrier, a damaged panel near the maintenance shed that no one had noticed during the chaos. He was inside the enclosure now. with the tigers. Dr. Hughes couldn't breathe. Every wildlife expert in her head was screaming that this would end in disaster. 10-year-old dogs don't approach apex predators and survive. Biology doesn't work that way. Nature doesn't work that way. But Ranger wasn't listening to biology. He limped forward, directly toward the 4 massive white tigers. His head was up, ears forward, body language radiating something staff hadn't seen from him in 3 years. Authority. The tigers moved toward him, not running, but closing the distance with predatory precision. Chase reached him first, his 485-pound frame towering over the shepherd. The tiger circled Ranger once, shoulder bumping him hard enough to make the dog stagger. "No," Claire whispered. "Please, no." Chase bumped him again, harder this time. A dominance display. A test. Ranger held his ground. Then he did something that made everyone watching freeze. He barked, sharp, commanding, the exact tone he'd used when the tigers were cubs. The bark that meant, "Stand down." Chase stopped mid-circle. His ears flicked back. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then Chase lowered his head and stepped aside. June approached next, her 380 pounds moving with calculated grace. She put her massive face inches from Ranger's muzzle and growled, low, rumbling, the sound of a predator establishing hierarchy. Ranger didn't flinch. He barked again, adding a sharp snap of his jaws. The correction bark, the sound that used to make June back away from trouble when she was small. June's growl faded. She touched her nose to Ranger's, then moved to his left side and sat down. "They remember," Marcus breathed. "They actually remember the commands." Kara and Frost came together, flanking Ranger from both sides. Kara sniffed him thoroughly, her blue eyes studying every inch of the aging shepherd. Frost bumped him gently with his massive head, not aggressive, almost affectionate. Then all 4 tigers did something that defied every prediction, every worst-case scenario, every fear. They formed a protective circle around Ranger. June on his left, Chase on his right, Kara and Frost covering the rear. The formation Ranger had taught them during tracking exercises, the formation that said, "We move as a unit. Dr." Hughes felt tears streaming down her face. "He's going to lead them out." But the fire was 4 minutes away now. Even if they moved fast, there was no clear path. The main gates were dead. The access road was blocked. The smoke was so thick that visibility was down to 20 feet. On screen, Ranger started moving, not toward any of the obvious exits. He headed east, toward a section of fence that looked completely solid from the camera angle. "Where's he going?" Andre asked. "That's a blind alley." But Dr. Hughes suddenly understood. She pulled up the property schematics on her tablet, scrolling to the maintenance records from 5 years ago. "There's an old drainage tunnel," she said, her voice shaking. "From before the expansion. It runs under the fence line to the eastern perimeter, but it's been closed for years. Half collapsed." "How would Ranger know about it?" Marcus demanded. "Because he used to patrol that section," Claire answered. "Back when he was still doing security rounds with his handler, before Marcus Hale was lost. That was his route." On screen, Ranger reached the eastern fence and immediately started digging at a specific section. The tigers watched for a moment, then Frost joined in. His massive paws tore through dirt 10 times faster than Ranger's aging limbs. Within 90 seconds, they'd exposed the tunnel entrance, a concrete pipe 3 feet in diameter, partially crushed but navigable. Ranger barked twice, the sound that meant, "Follow me." He crawled into the tunnel. Without hesitation, Kara followed. then June, then Chase. Frost went last, his massive body barely fitting through the opening. The security feed lost them for 45 seconds. 45 seconds of smoke and fire, and not knowing if they'd make it through or if the tunnel would collapse completely. Then motion sensors on the eastern perimeter triggered. One German shepherd emerged first, covered in dirt, limping badly now. 4 white tigers followed, squeezing out of the tunnel one by one into the clear air beyond the fire's path. They'd made it out. Staff in the emergency shelter erupted in cheers. Dr. Hughes sobbed openly. Claire grabbed Marcus and hugged him so hard he gasped for air. But the danger wasn't over. A massive burning pine tree on the eastern ridge suddenly cracked with a sound like thunder. It toppled directly toward the group, a 20-ton projectile of flame and wood. Ranger saw it coming. He tried to run, but his arthritic legs gave out. He stumbled, going down hard. And that's when the impossible became undeniable. Chase moved first. The massive tiger launched himself over Ranger's body, positioning himself between the dog and the falling tree. Frost hit him from the side, pushing Ranger clear just as the tree crashed down. June and Kara formed a wall, their bodies shielding the shepherd from the spray of embers and debris. When the smoke cleared, Ranger was on his feet, shaken but alive. The 4 tigers surrounded him, checking him with their noses, their massive bodies still positioned protectively around their former guardian. They weren't the cubs he'd saved anymore. They were the protectors he'd raised them to be. And they'd just proven that some bonds don't break with time, distance, or even nature itself. On the security feed, all 5 animals started moving together toward the emergency shelter. The tigers kept Ranger in the center of their formation, matching their pace to his limp, guiding him toward safety the way he'd once guided them toward survival. Dr. Hughes pulled up her phone and hit record as they approached. This footage would be viewed 200 million times in the next week. But right now, she was just capturing a moment that proved everything she'd believed for 3 years. Love doesn't override instinct. Sometimes, love becomes the instinct. The helicopter finally arrived, 6 minutes too late to help. The pilot radioed down to the shelter in confusion. "We've got visual on 4 white tigers and a dog," he said. "Walking together, toward your position. Is that normal?" Marcus grabbed the radio, laughing and crying at the same time. "For these animals? Yeah, that's exactly normal." But as the group got closer, Dr. Hughes noticed something that made her smile through her tears. Ranger wasn't leading them anymore. June was walking slightly ahead, clearing the path. Chase stayed on Ranger's weak side, providing support when he stumbled. Kara kept watch on the flanks. And Frost brought up the rear, ensuring nothing could approach from behind. They weren't following Ranger out of the fire. They were carrying him. The family had come full circle. The protector had become the protected. And the cubs he'd raised had just saved his life the same way he'd once saved theirs. The footage went viral before the fire was even fully contained. Someone had captured the moment on their phone from the emergency shelter. Ranger and the 4 tigers emerging from the smoke, moving as one unit. Within an hour, it was on every social media platform. Within 6 hours, news networks were calling it the most remarkable animal story of the decade. By the next morning, the video had 50 million views. Dr. Hughes's phone wouldn't stop ringing. CNN, BBC, National Geographic, everyone wanted the story. But she was too busy watching something far more important. In the sanctuary's recovery area, Ranger lay on a padded bed, finally resting. His paws were bandaged from the tunnel digging. His breathing was steady, but exhausted. He'd given everything he had to save those tigers, and 15 feet away, separated only by a temporary barrier, 4 white tigers refused to leave. They'd been offered food in their old habitat, now cleared of smoke damage. They wouldn't go. Staff tried to lure them to a different enclosure. They ignored it. The tigers stayed exactly where he could see Ranger, lying in formation around the barrier like sentries. "They're guarding him," Claire said softly, "the way he used to guard them." Marcus stood beside her, arms crossed, watching the scene with wonder. "The board is meeting this afternoon. They want to talk about what happens next." "What happens next?" Claire's voice rose. "After what we just witnessed, how is that even a question?" But it was a question, a complicated one. The board meeting lasted 3 hours. Patricia Chen opened with the obvious. "The rewilding program is suspended indefinitely. We can't separate them again, not after this." Dr. Rachel Kim, the rewilding specialist, reluctantly agreed. Those tigers just demonstrated problem-solving, memory retention, and cooperative behavior that shouldn't be possible after 3 years of separation. Scientifically, this changes everything we thought we knew about long-term cross-species bonding. "So what are you proposing?" asked board member Thomas Reed. Dr. Hughes stood up. She'd been preparing this pitch since dawn. "We create something new," she said. "A permanent cross-species emergency response program. Ranger proved that animals can be trained to guide other animals in crisis situations. The tigers proved they can protect and respond to non-predator leadership. We build on that." She pulled up a presentation on the screen. "We design a habitat, 40 acres, multi-level terrain, room for the tigers to roam naturally. But we include protected access points where Ranger can interact with them under supervision. We document everything. We study it. And we train other animal teams using what we learn." "You want to use them as a model?" Patricia asked. "I want to honor what they've already proven," Dr. Hughes corrected. "That love, training, and trust can create bonds stronger than instinct. That's worth protecting. That's worth learning from." The vote was unanimous. Construction on the new habitat began within 2 weeks. Donations poured in from around the world. Over $2 million in the first month alone. Everyone wanted to be part of the story. Everyone wanted to help the dog and his tigers. The Cross-Species Guardian program launched 3 months later. Ranger's new role was simple: comfort and guidance for large predators during stressful situations. When new rescues arrived fearful and reactive, Ranger would be brought in to help calm them. His presence, his training, his unshakable steadiness worked miracles. But his real purpose was the tigers. Every afternoon, staff would open the supervised access gate. Ranger would limp into the habitat, moving slower now, but moving with purpose, and the tigers would gather around him. They'd rest together for hours, the massive predators curled around the aging shepherd like they were cubs again. Kara would clean Ranger's face with her rough tongue. June would position herself so Ranger could lean against her warmth. Chase would patrol the perimeter while they rested, standing guard. And Frost would lie behind Ranger, creating a living backrest for the dog's arthritic spine. "They take care of him now," Claire told a documentary crew filming 6 months after the fire. "He raised them to be strong. They're keeping him comfortable in return." The footage of their afternoon sessions became therapeutic content. Millions of people watched it before bed, finding peace in the sight of such an impossible family. 1 year after the fire, Ranger turned 11. The Tigers, now in their prime at 4 years old, had settled into their roles as the sanctuary's most famous residents. But they never performed for crowds, never showed aggression toward staff, never forgot the lessons a German shepherd had taught them when they were small. On Ranger's birthday, Doctor, Dr. Hughes sat in the observation area watching the family together. Ranger was sleeping, his gray muzzle resting on Kara's massive paw. His breathing was peaceful. His eyes, when they opened briefly, were clear and content. He wasn't searching anymore, wasn't waiting by windows, wasn't grieving. He'd found what he'd been looking for since Marcus was lost. Purpose. Family. Home. "You know what the most beautiful part is?" Claire said, sitting down beside Dr. Hughes. "He didn't just save their lives when they were cubs. He shaped who they became. Those tigers aren't just predators. They're protectors, because that's what he taught them to be." Dr. Hughes smiled, tears sliding down her cheeks for the 1,000th time since the fire. "He didn't raise tigers," she said quietly. "He raised guardians." On the habitat floor below, Frost lifted his massive head and scanned the perimeter. June shifted position to block the afternoon sun from Ranger's face. Chase moved closer, his body providing extra warmth as the temperature dropped. And Kara, the smallest cub who'd been first to trust, first to feed, first to follow, kept her paw extended, letting the old shepherd rest against her strength. 4 apex predators, 1 aging dog, a family that defied nature, science, and every rule in the book, a bond that proved love doesn't have species, it only has loyalty. And somewhere in that afternoon sun, surrounded by the tigers he'd raised and the life he'd rebuilt, Ranger finally rested. Not because he was tired, because he was home. If this story moved you, then we need you to do something. Hit that subscribe button right now, not tomorrow. Not later, now. Because stories like this take weeks to research, days to write, and hours to perfect. Your subscription tells us to keep going, to find more impossible bonds, more unbelievable moments that restore faith in this world. Smash that like button if you believe some connections are sacred. Share this with someone who needs to remember that loyalty still exists. Drop a comment telling us what this story meant to you. We read every single one. This channel exists because of you. These stories survive because you choose to spread them. Don't let this be just another video you watched and forgot. Make it matter. Subscribe, share. Be part of the community that believes in the impossible. We'll see you in the next story, and trust us, you won't want to miss it.